Yes, we have recently concluded the roundtable discussion on valuing travel time variability and also wider economic benefits outside conventional CBA framework. And I will try to summarize some of the general conclusions. Now, I should start with that some kind of policy appraisal framework, for example, conventional CBA amended by certain effects that fall outside the conventional CBA framework, is a very important tool for any decision maker that wants to make sure that he or she gets the most value for the money spent on, for example, public infrastructure. It's nowadays a very well-known fact that these decisions, they are so highly complex and multidimensional in their nature, so just trusting one's own gut feeling will not just be enough to make sure that you actually get the most value out of public money spent. The conventional CBA framework that captures many effects, perhaps even more effects that many non-specialists would appreciate. It captures lots of the economic growth effects, it captures the user benefits, it captures things like comfort and also at least parts of reliability. But one of the effects that has been traditionally difficult to measure and value and hence also include in conventional CBA is travel time variability, that is reliability. Delays in the railway system, the public transport system, and also the unpredictability of car travel times, especially when you have severe congestion. Now, in the last 10 or 15 years or so, and maybe especially in the last 5 years or so, we have actually made quite a lot of progress with respect to this topic. We nowadays know much more about the social economic consequences, the valuation of things like increased reliability of transportation systems. And not only that, we also know more about how different policies actually affect things like reliability. How, for example, the relationship between congestion and travel time reliability looks like. What actually affects things like railway delays or public transport delays. So once you have these two parts, these two pieces of the puzzle, you need both the causal relationship from policy to reliability, and you also need the economic valuation of reliability and travel time variability into economic effects. Once you have these two pieces, then you can actually include them in the general CBA framework. And it would seem that we are, I think it's fair to say that we have now approached the point where it's better to use the methods that we now have, rather than saying that we shouldn't include them at all. As someone wrote or said, that putting a zero value on these things is not the neutral option. It's better to have something, even if there are uncertainties, than just pretend that these things are not there, especially since so much effort and money is spent on trying to increase the reliability and punctuality of the transport system. In terms of technical stuff, when you value things like reliability, you have basically two different methods called stated preferences and revealed preferences. Stated preferences is mainly about asking people hypothetical questions. What would you prefer out of these two options, for example, where one option might be more reliable and the other one might have a higher risk of delay, for example. These hypothetical questions have turned out to work better than you might first think when you hear about them, because they seem almost like magic. But it turns out that people are actually able to predict their own behavior under various circumstances to a fairly good extent. But obviously, these are fraught with uncertainties. Not only are people they have difficulties of imagining themselves under various hypothetical circumstances, and they also make certain errors in decision making which are more prevalent, it would seem, under these sort of experimental conditions than they are under real conditions where they get constant feedback on their own travel behavior. So the other method to try to get valuations of reliability is to use revealed preferences, that is, people's actual choices, their real behavior when faced with different travel options and travel alternatives. This is in principle a better way. The problem with studying actual behavior is that you need a lot of data. And having that data is not always easy, because you don't only need the data on the actual travel behavior. You also need data on the alternatives between which people choose, which is not the same thing. So you even need data on what is called the non-chosen alternatives, because otherwise you can't measure the trade-offs people make when they choose between, let's say, one punctual alternative and one less punctual alternative. But we felt in the roundtable that these methods, they are potentially so important and good, especially as a complement to stated preference methods. So they are definitely worth pursuing, even if we don't know as yet even that we'll actually get really reliable valuations out of that. In terms of forecasting policy impacts on reliability, we've also come quite a long way compared to maybe 5 or 10 years ago, but there is still quite some time ahead. Many of us felt that pooling the knowledge that we now have in terms of forecasting reliability would be a very good thing, because there are several countries around the world who have now different ways of quantifying and forecasting travel time variability. But these methods are seldom compared, so we don't learn enough from each other. So if we could find a way to pool our knowledge, pool our experience, then many would be winners from this. So, about travel time variability, the general feeling was that we can be cautiously optimistic, and we have actually approached the point where it would be possible to include these things into the kind of CBA framework which many countries use around the world to allow decision makers to make more informed judgments about public infrastructure policy. But in terms of wider economic benefits, there are things related to economic growth, for example, that are not captured completely by conventional CBA frameworks. Quite a lot of benefits are captured, especially things that relate to direct user benefits, but in terms of things that fall outside the direct user benefits, which can be, for example, things like tax revenues, for example, the increase in tax revenues that follows from an increase in wages, fall at least partly outside the conventional CBA framework. Some of these effects can now be predicted and forecast and analyzed in a way which we couldn't do maybe 5 or 10 years ago. They are still uncertain, but I think that it's fair to say that we are now approaching the point where it's better to try to include them than just to pretend that they don't exist. We need more research. We also need more comparative studies across countries, for example, and we need to know more about the exact nature of the overlap between these economic effects and the ones that are already captured in conventional CBA. But there are two areas which we still struggle in terms of quantifying and analyzing. And one is things that have to do with benefits for freight transport. We know quite a lot about freight transport, but freight transport also affects things like the industrial organization about in the freight industry, things like the location and logistics centers, for example, inventory, safety inventory, things like that. And since we don't have so much data about these things, and they are also so specific for any particular kind of industry or any particular kind of supply chain, that means that it's much harder to forecast these things compared to, for example, travel demand or commuting patterns, where we have lots of, well, maybe not identical individuals, but at least rather similar people. So these things are relatively easy to forecast compared to, for example, effects on supply chains, effects on logistics. But we still need to do this, and it's surely better to do something than to pretend that these things are not important, because they can actually be profoundly important. So one area where we surely need to do a better job in the future is trying to quantify the benefits and the effects of these supply chains on these logistics and freight benefits. The other thing, which is also a recurrent problem, is any time where you have a specific context, and this specific context can be anything from an important natural heritage, for example, or a particularly important airport, or a particularly important port, or a particularly important steel industry, which is special in the sense that it's very hard to generalize from experiences in other places and other times, and in order to try to quantify the effects, benefits or costs on this particular circumstance. And in these cases, I don't think it will be possible to do much better than try to construct what we can call a narrative, like a story where you describe the most likely effects, both the benefits and the costs of this particular thing, be it a port or a university or an airport or a famous castle or whatever. And trying to capture all of these particularities in a general CBA framework would probably be futile. But that shouldn't prevent us from trying to quantify and to the large extent possible try to describe these effects in an as impersonal way, that is, in as an objective way as possible. That being said, I think that we are actually rather rapidly improving the CBA framework, and with the hope of that we will, after this roundtable, we have actually identified quite a lot of points where we nowadays agree in the research and practitioner community much more than we did just a couple of years ago, both in terms of quantifying and value and reliability, and also in terms of quantifying and analyzing these wider economic benefits, which are to some extent in addition to conventional CBA. And with that, I hope that in the next following years, our appraisal frameworks will be even more useful for the people who will eventually be responsible for making the decisions about public infrastructure and transport policy.